promoting this effort. The good thing we have is we have until about 2025 before insurers start requiring this. And so if we get what's called a CLOMR, a continuing conditional letter of map revision from FEMA, which says, if you do this, we'll revise your flood maps. We have a little bit of time here to stop these cost increases, which are phased in order to get these projects done. But it's a very narrow window, which I think is why it's really essential that the first part I said, raising the creek walls, which will have the greatest effect, be done immediately, and that the next council take that on as a top infrastructure priority.
Now, this is a series of questions which I'm putting together about toxic sites in Ithaca and what the candidates will do to ensure that that contamination is properly controlled before building is allowed to continue. And they're referring to the construction site and waste transport route from contamination from the proposed construction at Gun Hill Park Apartments. We're concerned about, it's an essay. According to a recent article in the Ithaca Times about Common Council races, not one candidate reportedly voiced concerns about toxic sites that threaten public health and the environment all over Ithaca, because they exceed applicable cleanup standards, including cancer-causing solvent, lead contamination at Ithaca Falls, Ithaca Gun that migrated into Fall Creek. Problems all over South Hill, or a trailer park built on top of the abandoned City of Ithaca garbage dump near Wakelands. So far, nobody has done on Common Council, nor the mayor has taken any effective action to require the toxic hazards to be comprehensively cleaned up. Would the candidates please explain why Ithacans should vote for them, since they failed to promise to make sure these toxic hazards are fully remediated in strict compliance with all applicable regulatory requirements? If you support the requirement to clean up these sites effectively, what do you propose to do to achieve this goal? And they're referring to Gun Hill, the Gun Hill Apartments, developers getting tax breaks for building them, the lack of complete contamination cleanup. And they're also talking about the chain factory site on South Hill. And they're looking for how you will address these issues if you are elected. Did you understand that? Good. Jason.
So I, admittedly, this is probably a topic on which I am not, on which I need to learn more. I certainly would not support development on any contaminated sites. I know Gun Hill has been a recurring issue. There have been many efforts over the years to clean up Gun Hill. Each time it's failed to properly clean it up. I am aware of that, and I would think that the city would not support any development on that site until it meets all required standards, whether they be state or federal. Also with Southworks, which is I think what we're now calling the old Chain Works. There are some big plans for that site. I think those plans look very exciting and would be a great boon for the city, but that we absolutely can't have development on a toxic site. I'm unaware of where we currently stand in terms of toxicity on South Hill there, but I know it certainly has not passed standards in the past. So, you know, In short, I certainly would not support any development, even though it might represent some economic advantage to the city. I think it's, it's a priority that we ensure any development is on a safe site and that, it fully meets the strictest of standards at the state and federal level.
So I do want to thank you for that question, and I'm sorry this was not properly addressed before the forum. I do want to reiterate the fact that many of these issues are actually currently related to climate change. And I also want to emphasize my stance that we should absolutely be stricter on waste management, waste runoffs, and irresponsible disposal. Toxic environments affect us all. They affect our children. They affect our future. What I suggest is we need assessors for building sites that assess the risk factor before building and before developing. This would include any toxic runoffs, where they would go, and potentially how we could mitigate it before we build plants. I believe that this is necessary and we need to listen to these reports. We need to listen to these advisories. Otherwise, Ithaca is just going to become a dystopic future where everything is developed without care, without creed. We need to be very prudent with how we proceed with developments. Now, going back to what I said earlier about how many of these issues are related to climate change, right now, one issue that Ithaca has is due to our minimum parking requirements, many of our surfaces are becoming more and more impermeable. This means rain, when it comes down, has nowhere to go. What does this do? This increases our flood risk. This increases our waste runoff. This allows our toxic materials to go everywhere throughout the city. So one thing we have to do, if we ever want to prioritize climate change or waste management, is we also need to be considerate of how these developments affect where everything goes. And one thing that involves is reducing or absolutely eliminating minimum parking requirements in the city of Ithaca. Beyond this, I once again want to state we need to be very responsible with how we build developing in the future. When I say I'm all for housing affordability and building up, not out, I especially mean the emphasis on the fact that we need to build for a sustainable future, not just the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'll admit I'm not an expert. I think I'm guided by a couple of key principles here. One of which is we don't want to pass on things to future generations that we're not prepared to pay for. I lived in a place where we had 6 to 8 times the limit of PFOAs, which are forever chemicals. There was a recent movie, I forget the actor, where they sort of popularized this in Parkersburg, West Virginia. But this is something we need to be considerate of, and I think that sort of guides me here. I think in addition to that, I would also look at, there are successful ways of remediating toxic sites, and not all toxic sites are created equally. So I think those are two important things I keep in mind. I haven't looked at the reports. I understand that the initial Lake Street project, which is now called Houghton, was more toxic, and there's sort of more, my understanding is there are more significant issues than the one that's been proposed right now. But I also think too, is if you're a developer, and I would, if elected, I would take this to City Hall, that we need to make sure that they follow these processes, that we need to make sure that if someone's going to be making a lot of money here, that we sort of don't just wave them through and ignore underlying reports. And that too, we also, and this is sort of tangentially related, but I think is important, look at the source of where we draw our drinking water from. There have been concerns about contamination there, and changing these long-term sort of might be an answer. Again, I'm really not an expert on groundwater contamination, but I hopefully just by laying out a couple of those principles can explain how I might work through these problems.
Well, I would never support building housing on toxic waste sites that are not cleaned up to the strictest standards that we can possibly do. I think that if the planning board or any planning body within the city goes ahead and approves a project without having proper data in front of them to explain how the land will actually be mitigated and successfully remediated, then I think we are doing a huge disservice to everyone. to the developers as well, because they're wasting their time. Developers, it should be really clear to the developers what they need to give the city to show them what their plan is going to be and how effective their remediation is going to be. And we need to have people who are experts and objective experts. We can't just have developers come and give us a report from somebody who they hired to say that this is going to be okay. I am really concerned about Southworks because it seems like it's pretty far along in its planning stages. People have been talking about this for years without talking about what kind of mitigation needs to happen. And I think council members need to be asking a lot of questions to the developer and to the planning board. Projects should not be getting approved without knowing exactly how we're going to mitigate these issues. Thank you.
This concerns Ithaca's Green New Deal that commits our community to carbon neutrality by 2030. Do you support the Green New Deal? And if so, what will you do to ensure we achieve its goals?
So as I stated in my opening speech, I believe climate change is absolutely an issue, and Ithaca needs to invest in funding green public infrastructure as well as prioritizing the Ithaca Green New Deal and achieving net carbon neutrality. The first and foremost, what matters most is ensuring that Ithacans have reliable public transportation and that we're fully investing in the system so that we're no longer car dependent. Recently, Cornell refused to give $74,000 more to TCAT, which would have extended its operating budget and allowed it to expand its services. And I believe this is an absolutely shameful move on its part, considering the fact that they hired a COO with an annual base salary of $800,000. So beyond making Cornell pay, we also really need to focus on how TCAT will fit into the future of Ithaca, making sure that it's running not only through Cornell's campuses, but really reaching the edges of the city and making sure that everyone has a reliable way to get to work. They're not relying on their cars, and they can confidently say that our public transportation system is working for them. Beyond this, I'd also invest in other initiatives like Ithaca Rideshare, expanding the bike lane options so that people have other accessible ways to get to work. Beyond this, I'm a very large proponent of clean energy. In the past, I certainly would have supported the building of a hydroelectric factory so that we could have had cleaner energy now. Beyond this, in the future, I'm focusing on looking at how we can exchange many of our current energy sources for clean energy sources. So if you were to take anything away from this, I would say I'm absolutely a proponent of the Ithaca Green New Deal, and I'm looking for ways that we can become a more sustainable city together.
I think this is a really important question, and I think saying sort of the Ithaca Green New Deal doesn't really speak to what policy commitments there are, what we can do, and what's realistic for a city with a budget of $90 million. As a principle, I absolutely believe in decarbonization. We're not going to be able to survive the next 20, 50, or 100 years. I mean, certainly today and yesterday should have been a reminder of this with our air quality. That being said, I want to dive into a couple things. So there are a couple successes, one of which has been decarbonizing city buildings. This is not tremendously expensive for the city as a long-term project and is an important part of moving us to carbon neutrality. This is being done by cities and municipalities that are smaller and larger than us across the country. What hasn't worked is this commitment and the sort of effort to work with private equity firms to bring in capital to decarbonize people's homes. My understanding that is no one has signed up for this, and the sort of financial arrangement for homeowners hasn't been working. So I do want to talk about what is important when it comes to climate issues. One of which, as I mentioned earlier, are the flood maps and making sure that we are serious about investing in flood infrastructure that prevent people's homes. That's a real consequence of climate change that we need to address. I think beyond that too, it's looking at making sure we increase bus transportation. Even a diesel bus is better than an electric car in terms of the amount of emissions. So making sure we can have more people relying on public transportation, and we have a public transportation network that works. It does not right now. And then other things like Michelle mentioned, There have been plans in the past which have been killed for hydroelectric power on Fall Creek, but there are other ways we can work to decarbonize our city. So I think it's a constellation of policies, plenty of which are perfectly reasonable. But I think the two key takeaways are protecting homes from the impact of climate and flooding, and then 2, investing in ways so we can be part of a national movement at a place that's affordable for us to decarbonize our city more fully.
Well, this past week has certainly underscored the urgency that we have of having an attainable climate plan. And I'm not 100% sure that Ithaca Green New Deal is something that we can totally afford. I mean, I know that we can't afford every piece of it right now. I think that the new building codes that we put into place requiring net zero energy by 2026 makes a huge amount of sense. And I think I'm very proud that we've been able to do that. I think the common choice aggregation makes a lot of sense to pool our energy needs so that we as a community can get a decent sort of pricing on clean energy. I don't know about reducing emissions of the city fleet by 50% by 2025. That sounds unrealistic to me. I know that electric fire trucks are just extraordinarily expensive, and we don't even have enough money to have enough firefighters. So some of the things I think are not realistic. Just to maybe echo a bit what Clyde said with regard to the contracting that's going on right now with Block Power. I've seen some of the estimates for the insulation and heat pump systems that they're proposing putting in for people, and they're extraordinarily expensive. And it doesn't seem like the way to go. And I don't understand how we ended up with this. It would make a whole lot more sense, I think, for the community to partner with local contractors to see if we could get some sort of group pricing to do really good insulation and also the heat pump operations. Thank you.
Yeah, so while I support the goals of the Ithaca Green New Deal, frankly, I think it's a bit unrealistic. It's also very nebulous at this point. We don't have specifics other than saying that we're going to try to decarbonize the city by 2030. In speaking with constituents in the 5th Ward, I know a lot of people were very concerned that they were going to be compelled to swap out gas furnaces by 2030 and install heat pumps. And, you know, I would never support anything that would compel anyone to take on debt to achieve that goal. That said, I think there's a lot that the city can do. I fully support community choice aggregation. I think it's a great approach to providing clean energy to Ithaca. I hope we would see more initiatives like that. Also, I think that the some environmental mitigation with the flood maps is very important, and we need to really prioritize some resilient infrastructure for many of the environmental issues that we're facing. So again, I do support decarbonization. I think, again, with repaving streets and our infrastructure, not just with the flood maps, but with our streets, we can begin to start installing bike lanes. We've done a bit of that with our bike boulevards. I would like to see that extended. We've recently passed better, drawing a blank on the name, the Better Bike Walk Ithaca, which is also receiving some federal funding to do a study on what infrastructure we can put in place to encourage biking, to encourage walking, and to have better public infrastructure. So I would hope that we could continue with many of those initiatives.
Okay.
Sorry, I want to make sure. Um, This is a continuation. Somebody is worried about when they retire, they won't be able to afford taxes. Convincing Cornell to pay more would be an excellent plan to help ameliorate high taxes. How are you going to approach and work with Cornell to persuade them to do this? This is not the first time that we have worked as a community with Cornell to get them to pay more. The questioner and a couple of others want to know what your policy will be for working with Cornell.
Yeah, this is an absolutely critical question, right? I mean, you really can't have a city where the largest landholder is paying almost no tax. I mean, it's $1.6 million a year in the voluntary contribution. And so when these negotiations come up next year, I think there are a couple important things we can do. One of which is saying not everything needs to be in this memorandum of understanding. It's sort of fairly limited agreement. I think beyond that, in the MOU, I will push for certainly having more students being engaged, students pushing very hard on Cornell. They pay tuition. I think it's important that we say that they say that their dollars go towards investing in the city in which they live. That's just sort of the bottom line here. And working with residents and students and building a real coalition around this. I think beyond this, we don't have a lot of cards to play with Cornell is the sad truth of this. In the last negotiation that happened 20 years ago, Alan Cohen was able to get a pretty sizable increase, but we're dealing with a different Cornell administration right now. So what I would focus on are finding areas where it's in Cornell's best interest. Housing is a huge concern for them. I spoke to a chair of a department last week who said he had 2 faculty offers fall through this year because those people could not afford to find housing. So they only pay $200,000 into the county housing fund, making sure we increase that. I think it's also about working with them on public transportation. A lot of Cornell employees rely on public transportation. So figuring out how we can work around that. And I also think it's this understanding too, that we need to put pressure on them. And I understand that coming from a union family, but we also need to be reasonable and understand that we don't have a lot of cards to play. We need to put a lot of pressure, and that Cornell's not a magic bullet to solve our problems. I think sort of gesturing towards the university and say they should pay more is great, but the long-term fiscal issues that prevent austerity are not going to be solved by Cornell alone. I think it's sort of the sad reality of this, but I want to work with them to make sure we invest in the city. And I think if we approach it in a reasonable way, we can get something done here.
I think we need to identify exactly what our shortfalls are, because we have so many common areas. All the things that we want are things that Cornell wants. They want a good fire department. They want a fully staffed police department. They want good roads, clean water. All of these things we have in common. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require, I think, a lot of time actually, and a big groundswell of community support. But to tell you the truth, the city portion of the tax bill is not the biggest. The biggest portion of our tax bill is the school district. And I'm not talking about a new memorandum of understanding. I'm talking about a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. And that generally includes something from all of the taxing entities. So Cornell and the city, yes, they need to have this discussion, but it's also the Ithaca City School District who needs to have the discussion. Right now, this year, Cornell, if they were paying at the same rate that all of us, they would owe the city school district something like $42 million, right? They're paying $500,000 to the Ithaca City School District right now. And yet they do complain because they are losing, in fact, recruits also because of the Ithaca City School District, apparently. So Ithaca City School District needs to get on it. The county needs to get on it. This is about a total tax package. And that's the only way we're really going to see some relief for all of us who are, who've invested in the community for years and years and years. And now we're sort of wondering, how are we going to be able to afford to live here?
I would state that with respect to Cornell, we have to have both a short-term and a long-term strategy. Again, Cornell is not going to pay for all of our services, but in the short term, I think it would be very wise for the city to say, we understand that we have shortfalls in our departments, as Margaret stated. These are the shortfalls we have. And this is the funding we need to make those services whole. These are services, fire, police, Department of Public Works. These are services that directly and indirectly benefit Cornell. So I think in the short term, we can justify asking them for more money by showing them where our shortfalls are and how they can help us fill those shortfalls for mutual benefit. In the long term, I think so we aren't continually in this situation where we're asking for a handout. I think there may have to be some legislative remedies. And there may have to be some discussion with representatives in Albany. Other municipalities that are facing the same situation Ithaca is have sought legislative remedies. We may be in a situation where we have to do the same. I would also just like to state that I think addressing our full tax burden, in order to do that, we need to talk about sharing. Again, I will repeat this continually. We need to talk about sharing more services with other municipalities. Our political boundaries were drawn in the 1820s. They may not make sense for all of our services in the 2020s. So we need to really think about how we can work with others to share costs and gain efficiencies. Thanks.
Rebuttal, 30 seconds. Is that okay?
Have you spoken yet?
Okay.
I think at this point, we've all realized that Cornell likes to pretend that it lives in a void and all of his costs are completely internalized in that void. But at the end of the day, the students, the faculty, we all use the parks, we all use the roads, and we all rely on the resources of the departments. Everyone standing on this stage today agrees that Cornell needs to pay its fair share. The theme of my campaign is building bridges, not walls, and that's because I believe the most comprehensive way forward is by uniting the efforts of both students and residents. We need to provide a united front. We need direction and organization, not just hope. My opponent provides no actual plan for how they intend on pressuring Cornell's contribution to Ithaca to increase besides continuing to ask. Historically, we've asked. It's no longer effective. The previous mayor spent many years trying to pressure Cornell to increase, but that's not going anywhere. As students, we have unique access to the largest number of people that hold the most sway to Cornell. The students, our alumni, and our trustees. We need to pressure them. The call needs to come from the inside. Ward 5 will be 95% students, and Ithaca is 2/3 students. We must acknowledge the fact that if we're ignoring this, we can't find opportunity for collaboration. Students are our greatest allies and our greatest assets in the push to pressure Cornell to pay an equitable, fair share, to urge the university to use our tuition dollars towards impacting and improving the city that we call home. In terms of an actual plan beyond this, I believe that one-time payments that Clyde has mentioned previously would work perfectly outside of an MOU to solve some of our more short-term problems. This would include having Cornell continue to pay into the housing fund, lump sums to TCAT, and having Cornell follow through on the dredging plan. Cornell's not the ultimate solution, but we need to work together to find one.
So just quickly, I want to clear the record on a couple key things. One, state remedy might look like an endowment tax. I think that's a great idea. It's probably also not very practical. I think one thing Ithaca has that other municipalities don't is we get a sales tax. So New York hasn't combined municipalities in the way that's being described since 1943 with the city of Rye. This is really not on the agenda in Albany. They really don't like to do this. There have been proposals, it just hasn't happened. So I think what is reasonable though is 354 buildings at Cornell are considered state-owned. There are existing pilot programs that do exist for state-owned property. Probably looping in those would probably be the most sensible one. It's sort of a small shift on Albany's end, and it would mean the money would come from Albany, not Ithaca, or not Cornell. But I think it's just important we be sort of honest and reasonable about what we can do here.
What will you do to help restart the Ithaca reimagining policing efforts to address the over-policing of Black and other marginalized communities? What is your perspective on what needs to change in the way things have been moving forward so far? How will you work with the county on their part of it? And how will you address mental health issues? Margaret.
Well, we absolutely need to have a city that has an anti-racist community policing. I think that we are so understaffed right now that we have lost the community policing that we actually had before. So right now, on any given day, even with mandatory overtime, we only have 3 to 4 patrol cars to cover the entire city. This means that we don't have people to do special details like commons patrol with foot patrol. We don't have bike patrol. We don't have speed in school zones. Investigations are like 6 months behind. It's really, they are demoralized and they are challenged in very significant ways. So we need to figure out how we can meet the needs of every community member here so that everyone feels safe and everyone feels respected. And we also need to figure out how we can best support the police so that they also feel respected and not demoralized. We are experiencing terrible staffing shortages. It's been happening, all over the country. Ithaca is not unique with this, but we really do need to fix it. At the same time that this is all happening, I've lived here for a very long time, and I think many, many people feel that Ithaca is a much less safe place than it was not very many years ago. Violent crime has gone up. We need to bring community policing back, and especially to the neighborhoods that are most vulnerable and need it the most. Thank you.
As I stated in my opening statement, I support reimagining public safety. I've read the entire report. I liked many of its conclusions. I fully understand our police department is diminished and demoralized. And I think the cause of that was a lot of rhetoric and some of the process around that of reimagining public safety. They felt that they weren't part of it and that they didn't have a voice. There was then an amendment process to the reimagining public safety, which involved some of the parties that felt that they hadn't been part of the initial report. And I believe a couple of council meetings ago, they passed those amendments. The police have announced that they're fully on board. So I hope that moving forward, we can have a fully staffed police department that is responsive to the whole community. Every person in this community needs to think that law enforcement works for them. Reimagining public safety calls for some additional community oversight. It also calls for some additional training for police so that they're more sensitive, so that they get the sensitivity training they need to understand the concerns of the broader community. There's also a requirement that they get involved with some volunteer organizations within the community. I fully support that. Everyone needs to think that the police are working for them. So I think that instituting reimagining public safety, having unarmed responders, in addition to fully staffing our police department, can work wonders in terms of reducing the crime in Ithaca, which we all feel is growing, and making every member of the community feel that law enforcement is working for them.
I think we all believe that reimagining public safety is something that is integral to making sure every Ithacan feels safe, heard, respected, and protected. Currently, 1/3 of the calls given to the Ithaca Police Department can be responded to by unarmed forces. Unfortunately, The council's hands have been tied and couldn't allocate more funding to reimagine public safety in the past, which currently only has 4 responders. We need to be considerate of who reimagining public safety is for and who this affects, and act in a way that's sensitive to the needs of our marginalized communities and those that currently don't feel safe by only a one policing model or even just the hybrid model. I believe we do need to expand reimagining public safety because clearly it works. It works by responding to non-crisis emergencies, by making sure that people that they are helping feel safe, feel comfortable receiving their help. But beyond this, we also need to make sure that we're not disenfranchising our current police department. Any solution forward needs to be one that takes the most amount of sensitivity into consideration. This would include diversifying the staff in IPD. Beyond this, increasing sensitivity training. I believe the only path forward really is by bolstering reimagining public safety as we see it now, because we know it's a model that works and it's one that ensures that more of our community feels comfortable, while also keeping in mind how we're going to move forward with IPD and the relationship between the two in the future.
I feel this is really critical that we are serious about public safety reform. And I think all of everyone up here on the stage is. The thing I come at this with first is that public safety reform was not built for white guys from the suburbs. You know, this is not who this is for, right? I mean, there's a serious problem in this country. I think the Ithaca police has a fairly good reputation, but there's a serious problem of policing, not the officers themselves, rather the system and the way it's set up, not meeting the goals of stopping violence, right? Our current policing system is very reactive, not proactive at dealing with violent issues. And I think beyond that, it's important that we need to build a lot more trust in communities. So delving into what the report said and some of what it didn't say, but I think it should have said, are a couple of things. One of which are community responders, right? So what does this look like? And I think this is really important. These are folks from communities who are actually out on the streets, right? It means that instead of just having 4 people on the street, we have people who live in these communities who are walking around, who are unarmed, who are talking to folks and building trust. I think more trust building, more people feeling like they can rely on a law enforcement response is absolutely critical to improving public safety. And I think beyond this, of course, independent oversight of the IPD is great and is essential. I think there are calls for that with a city manager, with someone who really coordinate forgive me, I'm sorry, it's been a long evening, who'll coordinate the response of public safety officials. And I think that's a great way we can have more accountability and have a civilian-led approach to making sure we don't harm marginalized communities. So those are the 2 ways I approach this issue and 2 solutions I see.
Now we have time for one more question, but only give them 1 minute to answer before we go to the closing statements. So you will be first, Jason, for this one. And this is, if elected, how will you work with your colleagues to reach agreement on issues and policies with which you disagree?
So if elected alderperson, I look forward to working with all of my colleagues. I think there is on the current council, there's quite a diversity of opinion. And I think everyone brings a different perspective, and everyone's perspective needs to be respected and accommodated. In my current job, I have to deal with lots of people with varying demands. And I think I've built quite a good reputation of being someone who works very hard to accommodate and bring people with different ideas and perspectives and demands together, so that we can have a shared resolution. Again, I think everyone elected to council brings an important perspective. No perspective is more than another. Ithaca is a diverse place. It's what makes Ithaca great. It's why I love Ithaca. We need to honor that and be accommodating to all perspectives.
I'm proud to reiterate that the crux of my campaign is building bridges, not walls. And that's because I full-heartedly believe that difference makes us stronger and that diversity should be our guiding light. I understand that everyone's lived experience matters, whether you see it or not. As a queer daughter of immigrants, the lens of which I see and interact with those in my life, and as well as what I believe in and what I strive to achieve, is impacted by how I grew up and how I interact with those around me. Not everyone's lived experience is seen, but everyone's lived experience is valuable and it matters. I'm proud to say that if elected as alderperson, I will ensure that I will work together with my colleagues, because any type of stop is not a stop, it's just a redirection. I think there's always common ground that can be found, whether that's between students and long-term residents, or whether that's between alder people, or whether that's between the wards, whether that's between the city and the county. I believe that collaboration, the bridges, will always be the way.
I absolutely want to work with people. I think the only way we can get anything done is by forging consensus. And I understand, a lot of times I can be wrong about plenty of issues. There are a lot of people with a lot really valuable knowledge who have taught me a lot in my time here, and I hope to work with them. I think that's what this is all about. I think that's the only way. We have serious generational challenges in the 21st century. We have to deal with climate change. We need to deal with public safety and having a place where everyone feels safe here and they don't feel marginalized. And we have these really big challenges, and I don't think hostile approaches are the way to do it. So I appreciate that we've been able to have a really substantive debate tonight, and sort of hope to continue on that approach if elected, to make sure that we've got a city that works for everyone.
Well, with all the polarization in the country, I think that Common Council could be a refreshing place to be, actually. I think the potential intergenerational nature of it would be great. I've worked on campus for pretty much all my adult life. I've worked with people of all ages. I especially have worked with many, many, many students and developed bonds. I think we have an extraordinary community, and that we probably don't tap into each other enough. So I think in addition to working with colleagues on council, that we need to have a more inclusive, engaged sort of community in general to bring everyone into this. And I really look forward to the opportunity to talk with each other and learn with each other and build close alliances so that we can achieve all the work that we really need to do. We have very serious issues in front of us. Thank you.
And now we're going to go as quickly as possible to final statements. We're running a few minutes late, for which I apologize. And because of the way we've been going, you start again, Michelle. It's 2 minutes. But no running over.
I wanted to thank you all so much for your time tonight. I think this was a really productive debate, and I'm glad we got to hear so many amazing ideas. Really quickly, I wanted to run down some of the most heated issues tonight and compare and contrast the possible solutions to them. The first is we all agree Cornell needs to pay an equitable and fair share. The solution I've proposed tonight, and one is one of which that I would also leverage my unique background and skills to fully implement. The call needs to come from the inside when asking and pressuring Cornell administration to actually pay. The students, the alumni, the trustees. The unfortunate fact is that is who Cornell will listen to. If we can make students aware of the current, frankly, parasitic relationship that Cornell has with the city of Ithaca, I can guarantee you that the majority of them would agree that this is unfair, and they would push administration to change, to increase their payments to the city of Ithaca. Beyond this, we shouldn't just rely on an MOU that frankly is not even that adjusted for inflation on a year-to-year. We also need to ask Cornell to make these lump sum payments, whether that's to community housing, whether that's to bolstering TCAT, or whether that's to paying for the flood dredging program. The second, and this is possibly the biggest issue, is lowering costs for residents. One of the most eminent issues is how we're going to mitigate flood risk, and in turn, how we're going to lower flood insurance costs for residents. I want to once again reiterate my plans to follow a Vermont model and see how we can externalize the costs in such a way that they are not impacting our citizens. We should not have to constantly pay higher taxes, higher fees. This should be something that is well planned, well directed, well organized for our future. Beyond this, I want to close by saying I'm very proud to have made Ithaca my home. I know that together we can achieve a brighter future, and I really do believe that this can happen by building bridges and not walls. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me here. Thanks for folks who submitted answers to questions. I think there are two things I want to bear in mind: are creativity and boldness. Right now, we have these serious problems confronting our city. We've talked about the climate issues, we've talked about affordability, we've talked about Cornell's contribution, and the list goes on. And I've also said a lot of things that I don't believe we can do, but there's a lot we can't that is within the realm of possibility. I think a perfect example of this is with our county fleet. It was said, you know, we can't afford to make it electric. Well, some people were creative and they applied for federal grants, and now I think the county fleet is on its way to being 100% electric over the next couple of years. So there's a lot we can do. I think it's about being intentional. It's about serious planning around these issues. As I pointed out from the beginning, we do not have a plan to deal with our housing crisis. We do not, and we have not invested sufficiently in dealing with our flood issues that will really be exceptionally deleterious for residents. So I think it's about being creative, it's about being bold, and it's about really pushing the envelope so that we can make Ithaca an affordable place for everyone to live. And the reason I say this is because I think it's possible. As someone who, in many ways, I feel like is the product of the labor movement, a lot of people will tell you it's not possible until you put pressure on them, until you rewrite the laws, and until you seriously challenge the systems we have. And so I think that's a big part of this. I'm really thrilled to be running. I'm excited to talk to every resident here about the issues facing them. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me, because I want to make sure I'm accessible and that going forward we have elected officials who are really accessible and listen to the issues of the residents of the city.
Community organizing, research, advocacy, thinking outside the box, building alliances. These have all been constant themes throughout my personal life and my professional life, and I look forward to bringing these skills to Common Council. So my focus and my wish list is very long. Since we can't do much without better funding, that tops my list. Securing an equitable financial agreement with Cornell so we can better fund the things that we all want. Fund our roads, fund our sidewalks, and fully staff our critical departments: fire, police, building, and public works. We need to fairly compensate our employees. We must explore cost sharing and consolidation of services, dare I say the word merger, with neighboring municipalities in the county, and reprioritize our spending. We must institute smart changes to the police department. We must ensure anti-racist community policing while fully supporting and building back our department. We need to closely coordinate with county, state, and federal representatives to provide the best possible services for those unhoused in our community. We also need transparency and engagement. I'd like to work to improve communications between council members and residents. I think creating a citywide neighborhood association would make a huge amount of sense. Having town hall style meetings, we don't have great opportunities for people to engage with council and engage with staff, and I think this is really critical. I also think that we could better tap our local talent and develop a student faculty research and internship program, as well as a student advisory board. There is a huge amount to be done. I'm ready to get started. I appreciate you being here very much, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thanks again to you all and for sticking around for such a long time. Again, I'm a 17-year resident of the Ithaca area. Ithaca is my home. I love the diversity in Ithaca. I hope that we can maintain that diversity. It troubles me greatly that affordability in the city is becoming such a large issue. And I'm hoping on council I can help address that through responsible city budgets and trying to lower that tax burden. We have to get We also need to have fully staffed city departments. I think it's critical that in order for us to have well-performing basic services, in addition to trying to achieve some of the broader goals that we're seeking, we've got to have well-paid staff without a lot of turnover, which is what we're currently experiencing. That is key. So I hope also when I get on council to really bring a focus to local issues and local solutions. I am not an ideologue. I'm not trying to use council as a platform to speak about national issues. I want to really solve Ithaca's problems. That is my focus. My ambition does not lie beyond the city council. I just really want to focus on problems here in Ithaca so we can keep Ithaca diverse and affordable and a place where anyone can live and enjoy the things that I enjoy about Ithaca. So I just want to thank you again for coming. And I would encourage you all to vote. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. This is the end of the evening. And I would very much appreciate it if you folded up your chairs that you're sitting in and place them against the wall. Martha, if you wave your hand. Not against the table because we have to move the table. So if the chairs can all go against the wall. There is candidate literature, or there was on the tables at the back. There is League of Women Voters material on the table at the back. And I think there is still some YV2 material outside on the welcome table. So thank you all and good night.